Hey, what is up guys, TechSnackles here, and this is my review of the OnePlus X. This is the first OnePlus phone I've ever used, and for $249, this qualifies as a budget smartphone, something OnePlus is known for doing well. And yes, it looks good and feels good. It kind of feels like a hybrid between an iPhone 4 and a Sony Xperia Z, which in no way screams cheap. But a lot of times looks can be deceiving, and at this price point you do expect some compromises. So we're going to do something a little bit different and start with those. So first off, not really a compromise, but you do need an invite to get the OnePlus X. Now this is something, that OnePlus typically does. Luckily, I've got a few to give away, so here's one. And for more, you can follow me on Twitter at TechSnackles. Secondly, camera. You probably were expecting this. It hasn't got the best camera. It's got a 13 megapixel sensor with f2.2 aperture, which sounds good. And it is a decent camera, good for the price, good enough for your casual shots, and it launches quickly, which means you're less likely to miss a shot. And it does sometimes take good pictures, but you can't always rely on it. A lot of times the AMOLED screen fools you into thinking the photos are good, but then when you actually export them onto a bigger screen, you start to notice the issues. Mainly the lack of detail, the large amount of grain and noise, as for some reason this camera decides to bump up the ISO a lot of times, even in good lighting conditions. And you'll also notice the washed up colors, which just ruined many photos. Images also tend to get overexposed with strong lighting, and even HDR can't consistently fix the problem. But just like the Nexus 6P, I do recommend using HDR most of the time. Now when this camera tends to struggle the most is at night. Shots are often very grainy and filled with noise, and due to the lack of OIS, they are also blurry. In fact, the image stabilization seems to be a major issue with this camera, as it underperforms in low light situations, and video is really shaky. Video quality is perhaps what disappointed me most. It does record at 1080p, but the footage just isn't great. Again, this camera is good enough for your casual shots, but if you really want to do some photography, this isn't for you. But I think that with improved image processing software, the camera quality could improve, especially with some improved digital stabilization. Oh, and that front camera isn't great as well, but it's fine for your casual selfies and video calls. Another drawback is the speaker. There is one bottom-facing speaker, and like in a lot of smartphones, it is easily covered with your fingers. But that's not really the problem. The sound in the speaker just isn't very good. It's quite rusty. It does get loud, but again, the sound just isn't good, so you wouldn't want to listen to it loud anyway. Now, there are also some things this phone lacks. It lacks some antenna bands, which might affect your connectivity depending with which network you're with. There's also the lack of NFC. Not a big issue for me since I don't really use Google Pay, but if you do, might be an issue for you. And there is no fingerprint sensor, which I've gotten used to in other phones. Luckily, it wasn't much of an issue just getting used to putting in a pattern, so not a big problem, and you really shouldn't expect a fingerprint sensor at this price. Now another downside is performance. It is packed with good specs for its price. It's got a quad-core Snapdragon 801 processor with 2.3 GHz and an Adreno 330 GPU, which is at the level of a 2014 flagship, and it's even got 3 GB of RAM. Now using this for basic tasks, it performs fine, as it should, but when you start pushing that CPU and GPU, then performance tends to stutter. In fact, this phone struggles a lot graphically, which doesn't do the screen any justice. When playing games like Asphalt, the graphics just struggle to keep up. Even with Subway Surfers, there were sometimes a few hiccups, which will affect your gaming experience on this device. But using it daily for video watching or browsing the web or checking social media or messaging, it performs fine. So those were basically the drawbacks for me when using the OnePlus X, but now let's talk about the good stuff. So let's start with design. The feel in the hand is obviously very important, and the OnePlus X doesn't disappoint with that glass and metal build. On top of that, it also looks good. Now, I don't like how the power button is below the volume button. It did take me a while to adapt, but that's just a minor issue. Another one is the capacitive touch buttons being quite sensitive, which means they were easy to accidentally trigger. Now you should also note that this phone is a fingerprint magnet, and it's actually quite annoying how it gets completely smudged in fingerprints, and it's also extremely slippery on surfaces. I mean, it's made out of glass, so you should really be expecting these two things. So I ended up using the case that comes included in the box, and that's another awesome thing about OnePlus. They don't hold back on the packaging, and if you've seen my impressions video, you know that this phone comes with a silicone case, a nice long micro USB cable, and an adapter, as well as a screen protector that's already been installed. And speaking of the screen, it is possibly the best thing about this device. It is a 1080p AMOLED display, and since it is only 5 inches diagonally, this means there's a PPI of 441 pixels, and this results in a very crispy display. It's beautiful, colors look great, and watching videos on it and playing games is awesome. It's just really unfortunate that the graphics struggle a lot of times and the speaker isn't that great. Now on it, you'll be using Oxygen OS, which is perhaps my favorite Android-based OS. It currently runs off Android 5.1, but OnePlus has said that Marshmallow will hit this phone sometime next year. Now what you get with Oxygen OS is basically stock Android with some extra functional features and customizations. You get, in my opinion, one of the best wallpaper selection out of any phone. You get double tap to wake. You get the ability to customize your buttons with different actions so that you can, for example, open your last app by long pressing the home button. There's also the switch on the left side where you can switch between different notification profiles. So it's basically a mute switch. You also get gestures that allow you to draw a circle while the screen is off, so that you can immediately launch the camera. You can also customize that the color of that LED on the top right and assign different colors for different kind of notifications. There are also some really neat battery saving dark wallpapers and features like dark mode, which basically make use of AMOLED's True Blacks technology to save some battery. Now the OnePlus X only has a 2525 mAh battery, and in terms of usage time, it is actually pretty solid. I've easily gone through a full day of use without a problem, usually getting around 4 to 5 hours of screen on time. And you can even stretch it out to 2 days of use if you really want. And with a Marshmallow update, I can only see it getting better, especially as Doze makes its way through. If you've seen my Nexus 6P review, you know that Doze is one of my favorite features of Android 6.0. And so if it comes to this phone, it will definitely improve battery life. If you don't know what it is, it basically improves battery life, especially while the phone is on standby. And if you run out of battery, there is no fast charging here unfortunately, but it charges via micro USB, which means you don't have to buy new cables unlike the USB-C on the Nexus 6P. Now the last thing I like about this smartphone is that it has expandable storage. It only comes with 16 gigabytes out of the box, 11 of which are available, but it has a SIM slot that allows you to either have 2 SIM cards or a nano SIM and a micro SD, which in turn allows you to add up to 128 gigabytes of storage. So that is the OnePlus X, and here's my issue with it. So at first, this phone for that price, it looked very compelling and almost a no-brainer, but in the end, I've kind of realized this is a very balanced phone in terms of what's good and bad. It kind of feels like a 2014 phone more than a 2015, especially for the specs, which made me look for some 2014 phones. One of them being the LG G3, which was my favorite phone released last year. And I found out it's available for £230 on Amazon here in the UK, which is about £10 more than I paid for the OnePlus with shipping. And looking at that phone, it has got a bigger and better QHD display, a bigger replaceable battery, and expandable storage as well. So in the end, although I like the OnePlus X, I would rather go with a G3. I think the OnePlus X is a very compact, albeit average phone. I think if you do decide to get it, you'll like it, but it feels like a 2014 phone rather than a 2015. So with that said, I would recommend you guys check out 2014 flagships right now. You can probably get them with a price cut, and you don't need an invite to get them. So yeah, that's basically it. Thanks all for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you all in the next one.